few weeks ago, Maine Democratic Senate candidate Graham Platner sat down with the New York Times and was asked, hey, there have been a few scandals plaguing your campaign. Is there any other dirt coming out about you? And here's what Platner had to say.
But the GOP is going to dig up everything and more that they can.
Yeah. And probably lie at some point. I mean,
Is there something new you want to get ahead of?
no, I mean, like I've lived my life. I've been there for the whole thing. And and because of that, like I mean, I know what I've been through. I know what my behavior has been. I know all of it. And there's a reason that even after however many months that was, October, when they dropped the opposition research stuff on us. And the whole time there was always this like, oh, there's more coming. I'm always like, I don't know like what this more is going to be.
So he said, I don't know what this more is going to be. Well, this past weekend, the Wall Street Journal brought us more. They reported that Platner had sent sexually explicit text messages to multiple women outside of his marriage. It was also revealed that he maintained an active profile on the site Kik, which is a messaging app often used for, they call casual encounters. He was under the username phustle0331 and had a shirtless mirror selfie as his photo. What's fascinating about this is that these texts were uncovered because Platner's wife, Amy Gertner, actually disclosed those messages to the Platner campaign months ago at the beginning of this sort of primary process as part of self-opposition, which is, this process in campaign world where, campaign manager, I've been through this before, you sit down with somebody and you're like, hey, tell me everything that could possibly come out about you. It's actually what good campaigns should do. Now, those good campaigns typically get out ahead of all of that dirt and disclose it on their terms. That is not what Platner did. He sat on this information and did not disclose it. And obviously, based on the New York Times interview, appears to have misled or lied about whether there was any more dirt. And we'll come back to this in a bit. But there's a big question looming over, like, what else is going to happen, right? So Platner himself, when this news broke, initially blamed the media, called it journalistic malpractice, and disputed the account of the former aide. And the campaign initially framed this as a private issue, but then Platner's wife came out, gave a press conference saying she stood by him and that they're working through, they worked through these issues together. And so that sort of scandal, whatever we want to call it, right, is part of a sort of pattern of information that's come out about Platner. And for Platner, who is new to politics here, this is a particularly high risk period of time because voters don't know him and he doesn't have much of a record. So the people's judgments of him and their impressions of him are being set right now. So the concrete is still wet. It is not dry. And let me give you a tour of some of the recent things that have come out about him. So he's been dealing with a series of Reddit posts that he posted between 2013 and 2021, where he made a series of controversial statements. For instance, on sexual assault and alcohol consumption, he responded to posts saying about sexual assault. He said, holy fuck, how about people just take some responsibility for themselves and not get so fucked up they wind up having sex with someone they don't mean to. Men and women, you make a choice to consume enough of the substance to lose your self-control. So if you want to be in a compromising situation, act like an adult, for fuck's sake. He also called himself, he says he became a communist as he became older. He talked about the need for an armed working class. He wrote, fuck these cops, and deemed all police to be bastards. I think the most sort of troubling for his politics is that on rural Maine voters, he said that people who live in rural Maine actually are racist and stupid. He said, yes, why don't black people tip? And for all of these messages, he actually issued a direct-to-camera apology and attributed his past behavior and comments to post-traumatic stress disorder. He served as a Marine in Iraq and Afghanistan, undoubtedly in some very difficult situations, and was in the line of fire. And so that's how he explained those posts away. And I think the question for voters when you look at stuff like that is the timeline, right? This is a guy in his 40s. So this is not like youthful indiscretions. This is not always stuff that happened a decade ago. Some of the stuff went up to 2021. The sort of texting and sexting was very recent, as was Platner's own denial of it, which just came a few weeks ago, meaning his denial that any new information was going to come out was just a few weeks ago. So there's like integrity stuff mixed up in very recent behavior from him, right? And I'll talk in a bit about how not just how voters are going to treat this, but how a campaign could or could not remedy this and mitigate the damage here. The biggest controversy involving Platner, arguably, is a tattoo that he has, which is a skull and crossbones that closely resembles, I think it's called the Totenkopf, which is a symbol used by the Nazi SS. Platner has stated that he got the tattoo while drinking one night while stationed in Croatia and has gotten it covered up. His explanations here I find hard to track because at various points he has suggested that his PTSD was at issue here, but then has said he didn't know what the tattoo was. And there's definitely some evidence that he did know what the tattoo was, and because he got it covered up. And there are allegations that his campaign manager said that she or a campaign staffer knew that she said that Platner had told her he knew what it meant. Platner was also on Reddit threads where it seemed very apparent what the meaning of this was. I actually interviewed Platner a few weeks ago and gave him a listener question for my audience on this question. So let me play this for you. This is from Sarah from York, Maine. She says, I will vote for you, but I'm still confused by the tattoo thing. Your explanation on the Daily on Saturday made sense, but then I Googled it and found some conflicting information. The thing that keeps tripping me up is that on the Daily, you said you didn't know the tattoo was, and I don't know how to pronounce it, Totenkopf, until reporters told you last October. But the CNN piece showed Reddit posts where you used the word Totenkopf yourself back in 2019 in a thread about military skull tattoos. And your former political director told the Bangor Daily News you'd actually mentioned to her that tattoo could be problematic about a month before the story broke. Can you help me understand why those things don't contradict what you said on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple. One, the CNN report doesn't say I used the word. It says that I was in a longer Reddit thread in which somebody else used the word. And I can't control other people's language. So it was also a thread in which I was commenting about a totally separate topic. So it was not like, yeah. As for my political director, I'll just be honest, that is made up. So, and it was only said after that person left the campaign, and not in a good way. So, I think that was just more of a revenge thing. I've told the story a million times, so I'm not really going to try to tell it again. But look, I got it with a bunch of other Marines. They had the tattoo. They have the tattoo. I went through multiple security clearances where I got screened for gang and hate tattoos. I had a skull and crossbones. That's why I got it. The Marines I got it with, we all got a skull and crossbones, which is a fairly popular kind of motif to get in combat units. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I find this difficult, especially in light of what we just learned, right? So in order to believe Platner, you have to believe that he didn't know what this tattoo was, despite that Reddit situation and despite the sort of context. It's like, you don't know what you put on your body. Nobody ever pointed it out to you. But then you have the staffer who says that she had the conversation with him and he said he did know. And so it's like a he said, she said situation. And in a he said, she said situation, your integrity is very important. And so if you have a history of lying or improper behavior, every little thing that comes out that tells us, hey, you are somebody who's comfortable telling lies, makes it less likely that we're going to believe you. And I think this is a problem for him because I think Graham Platner can overcome mistakes, right? I think he can say, okay, I got this tattoo, or I cheated on my wife, or I said things that I don't believe in. I think he can overcome them if he's able to draw a line and say, hey, I have changed. But he's mixing some apologies for things like the Reddit posts with denials, like about the tattoo, right? And arguably about his marital improprieties, which his explanation is not very clear on that, and blaming the media is not great. So he is branding himself as an authentic person. And I know that a lot of people in our politics now think that like being authentic is like wearing a flannel shirt and cursing a lot. But actually, authenticity comes down to, can you look people in the eyes and tell the truth? And I think if people see that you're slippery about this explanation, it cuts against the brand of being this authentic, apolitical animal, right? So if you're just like lying like John Edwards lies or like Donald Trump lies, well, then are you really authentic, right? So that is a challenge for him. There also has been criticism about the way he describes himself. So he has described himself as working class, but his father is a lawyer, his mother's a restaurant owner. His grandfather was a famous modernist architect. He went to private school. His dad gave him the money, I think, to buy his house. And when he was asked about this, there's actually an extended clip of this in the New York Times interview. He has kind of taken a broad definition of what it means to be working class. He says, if you work for a living, you're working class. And I'm like, does that mean like surgeons are working class? I don't know. Like partners at law firms? Like that seems overly broad. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people who are working on farms or waiting tables might take issue with that. There's this woman Egbewole, who's a former Biden staffer who was on CNN, who I think had a particularly colorful response to all this, where she accused Platner of cosplaying middle class. Let's take a look at that clip.
But I think we have lost the plot on authenticity. I think Graham Platner is cosplaying working class. He wears it like a Halloween costume, and that has been placed on him by the same people who have run a lot of progressive candidates across the nation. In this pursuit of getting to know the everyman, we keep picking these people who I think show the worst parts of society. If I am to believe that Graham Platner can relate to everyday Americans, then that means I am to believe that everyday Americans are okay with Nazi tattoos because they get them accidentally when they're drunk, or because they served in the military. They have very regressive views on race and on gender. I just cannot accept the fact that to gain the working class, we have to dress up people who show the lowest of our values.
So taking a step back, there are a lot of problems and obstacles here for Platner and for Democrats. There was a great piece this morning in The Atlantic by Shannon Mullen, and I'll quote you from this. So this is what Mullen said, quote, add to that the revelation that in late 2023, his wife, Amy Gertner, caught him sexting with multiple other women. Notably, it was she who disclosed this to the campaign, not the candidate. Now Gertner is defending her husband in part by pointing out that he sent the text in the early days of our marriage, if somehow that's a mitigating, not aggravating factor. In response to questions about Platner's extramarital sexting, Bernie Sanders said, quote, I think it might be a good idea if we focus on the important issues facing the working families of Maine, such as gas prices, healthcare, and groceries. Senator Elizabeth Warren told reporters she preferred to focus on the price of gasoline. Okay, so that's the Atlantic piece, right? Now, Warren and Bernie Sanders, two of the biggest Platner supporters, and they're not alone. Like there is a ton of Democrats who've been supporting this guy from the beginning. Let's focus on Sanders and Warren for a second, because the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that when Platner was in Washington, D.C. Earlier this week, meeting with Democratic senators, in which he actually got an endorsement from Senator Schumer, there was a closed-door meeting with the senators, and both Sanders and Warren pressed Platner. And let me quote you from this, because it's a bit chilling for people who are concerned about this race. Here's the quote from the Wall Street Journal article. In a private meeting Tuesday with some Democrats, Senate Democrats, Maine Senate candidate Graham Platner attempted to quell growing concerns for some in the party that a string of negative revelations about his life had jeopardized his candidacy. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders asked Platner if any additional allegations would emerge against the embattled Democratic candidate. According to people familiar with the discussion, Platner said there weren't any. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who also attended the meeting, followed up and said there is a big difference between marital issues and allegations of sexual assault, the people said. Platner agreed and denied any credible allegations of assault were forthcoming. Okay. So these people who've been publicly endorsing Platner, even up through this scandal, are privately expressing some anxiety and pushing him on whether there's more to come. I think the order of operations here seems off. Maybe you should call him and press him and feel satisfied with his answer before you double down on your endorsement. Maybe you should have sat down with him and vetted him before you endorsed him at all. Maybe, that's just me. But this is a little chilling because does Warren know something? Like, she's asking about sexual assault allegations. Are there rumors or something that she's drawing from, or is she just shooting in the dark here? And his answer that he says he's denying any credible allegations of sexual assault seems like he, conceivably could be setting himself up for a denial, meaning like, oh, hey, somebody comes out and accuses me, I'm just going to say it's not credible. I mean, he does have this pattern of blaming the mainstream media or the establishment, right? And we'll get to it. The establishment has been behind him from the beginning, the new establishment of the Democratic Party. So this is concerning. Now, there's a debate here over what to make of things like marital infidelity and some of the things that Platner has said. There are different schools of thought here, right? There are people who say, hey, everybody makes mistakes and he's grown, right? That's one school of thought. Other people will be like, no, these mistakes are insurmountable and he shouldn't be in the US Senate. There's this special class of people, and there are actually quite few of them, that actually, there are quite a few of them, that argue that actually all these indiscretions are actually something that's a plus for Platner. And this is best encapsulated by a tweet from this gentleman, Jesse Newman. I'll read this for you. Is Graham Platner a perfect candidate? Yes, he is. Not because he has no warts, but because the warts are part of the point. Democrats keep saying they need to win back disaffected working class voters, veterans, young men, people who've made mistakes, people alienated from politics, people who don't speak and consult and improve language, people who've lived challenging lives and come out the other side with sharper moral clarity. Then a guy like Platner shows up and suddenly everyone acts like his redemption arc is disqualifying. It isn't. It is the message. So lots to unpack here. First of all, redemption arc, moral clarity. We just learned this weekend that he was cheating on his wife, I think while she was going through fertility treatment. Lied a couple weeks ago when asked in the press whether he had more stuff coming out, attacked the press when this came out. This is a guy who went through a redemption arc, moral clarity. That stuff is recent. So I'm not sure he's come out the other side of this redemption arc. And I'm not sure we should be celebrating people's moral failings. I think we should potentially forgive people for them and move on and say, hey, like, I'm satisfied with your explanation. But celebrating them seems like a bridge too far here. Now, Jerusalem Demsis in the argument had a really good piece on this, and I'll quote from her. What unites these reactions isn't so much the defense of Platner as the staunch denial that there's anything wrong here at all. Cheating isn't a moral failing we could forgive. It's a mark of rugged authenticity, and any qualms about infidelity are the prissy reflexes of an out-of-touch elite. She then went through and showed that actually people do, I know that we have Trump in office and all this kind of stuff, but says that, when you poll Americans, we're actually outliers in the international sphere. We abhor infidelity more than any other country in the world. Fully 90% of Americans say stepping out out on your spouse is morally unacceptable, right? The median for other countries is 77%. Notably, even the French, by a small majority, think it's a moral failing. I think that the Platner campaign also and his supporters, they'll default, and Jerusalem pointed this out, to think like euphemisms like personal issues or mental problems. Like, look, like, you can believe that people can change. You could believe that people who serve our country are entitled to even more leeway and still say, hey, like, I'm not satisfied with this explanation here, and I'm actually not sure this guy has been totally honest with me. I personally I'm not satisfied with the explanation he gave me on my own podcast a couple of weeks ago. And I have questions about whether he lied to me. And the clock is ticking. I'm recording this video on June 4th. The primary is set for June 9th. Platner's on the ballot. Janet Mills, the current governor, is on the ballot, even though she suspended her campaign. David Costello, another gentleman, is on the ballot. So actually, and I'm not endorsing anybody in here because this is a nonpartisan YouTube channel, but, there is this window of time for which people could express, who are Democrats, express their support for Platner or somebody else, right? But after June 9th, if Platner wins, he's the Democratic nominee. And the data here is a little bit dicey for Democrats. So just a few weeks ago, a lot of the Platner supporters, and there probably aren't any more prominent boosters of him than the folks at Pod Save America and Crooked Media, were just crowing about how dominant Platner is and how like his polling performance is somehow a validation of their early support for Platner. So John Favreau, host of Pod Save America, tweeted on May 27th. He tweeted out a poll that showed Platner at 51, Collins at 42, and he tweeted out the sarcastic, "Sure, but just wait until people hear about the tattoo he covered up." So basically, Fabs is crying and being like, "Hey, this guy's up 51-42." And notably, this was in May, right? The election's in November, as if this is some kind of validation. Now, Favreau knows, I know, anybody who's a student of history knows that Susan Collins, who is Platner's opponent, has traditionally outperformed her opponent's polls dramatically. So in 2020, Gideon, who was the last Democratic candidate, was leading in nearly every poll by a decent margin, like about +5 on average, leading up to the 2020 election. Now, what did Collins beat her by? 8.6. So that's a 14-point swing in the polling, right? So even if you had the pre-New Revelations polls, Favreau knew better than to crow about that, knew that there was a history of Collins outperforming. He'd just been around campaigns also long enough to know that campaigns, between now and November is a long time. Anything could happen. So it does feel like a huge disservice to his audience to be peddling information like that. And those were the recent polls a couple of weeks ago. But now, over the past few days, the Platner campaign released an internal poll that showed him up by just 4, which I think some period of overlap with this scandal. So, maybe within the margin of error, but close. But if you take that +4 when there was a +14 swing, 13 to 14 point swing for Gideon to Collins before, I mean, this means that there is a world of hurt coming Platner's world, and that he, for all practical purposes, should assume he's down. Which is what Kalshi shows. The odds of Platner winning slipped recently as of this morning, below 50% in the prediction markets. Now, the prediction markets, it's not gospel, but they're reflecting something back that I think a lot of people who are, don't have a motivated reasoning basis like Favreau, most people, believe that. Now, what are some of the demographics of this state? So this is the oldest state in the nation. The median age is around 44.8, which is well above the national median and the highest in the country. And 21% of people are over 65. The registration is 36% Democratic, 29.5% GOP, 28.8% unenrolled. So a lot of and those are what we would classically call independents. So a lot of independents. Green and independent candidates, 3.9%. So, there is a margin for Democrats in terms of enrollment advantage, but there are a lot of independents. Now, Harris won statewide the vote, 52.4%. She took 3 of the 4 electoral votes because they split the electoral votes. Biden won 53.1%, took 3 of the 4 electoral votes. Hillary Clinton won statewide, but there was a split that year. She won 47.8%. 3 electoral votes to 1, and Obama had bigger margins, 56 and 57.7%, and won all 4 electoral votes each time. So they have a history in presidential elections voting for Democrats, but they've been voting for Susan Collins. And the other candidate, the other senator is Angus King, who caucuses with Democrats. So Democrats have to, if they just merely win the Kamala vote, they will win this election. Which you can cut both ways. It could mean that maybe Graham Platner has some margin for error, or the flip side of the argument, which I've seen a lot of people make, is like, hey, you could have just put up a milquetoast Democrat. I don't know much about Janet Mills, but she's old. I know that for sure. But also is the governor who's won statewide before. Maybe you put somebody like that up, and that risk-averse approach actually would work. Let me give you some takes from around the political spectrum, mostly from Twitter. So this is Niles Francis referring to the internal, saying up only 4 in your own poll against a veteran incumbent with a history of overperforming polls by more than that before even facing $1 of negative ads. Huge props to Katz, David Hogg, and all you whiny podcasters. Your buddy here is going to cost us the Senate. That prompted a response from Wajat Ali, who said, this is idiotic. Mainers had a choice between Platner and Mills. They chose Platner. How would Mills have defeated Collins? Also, Platner is still up. He would be rising if the Democratic establishment hacks didn't continue to bring him down even now. Not a Jewish girl, not a good Jewish girl, replied to that saying, this is just false. Nobody in Maine has voted. Platner got millions of dollars from out of state. His competitors did not and could not afford to compete. You rich lefty fucks forced this guy on Maine, and now we might lose the chance to take the Senate. Okay, so that was that exchange. Here's another tweet. This is from Mason McCain. I'm increasingly convinced that 1, Platner has a campaign-ending scandal. 2, Republicans know what it is. 3, we don't. Our top priority is finding out what it is and expose it ASAP, preferably before Tuesday, before the July 2nd dropout date is also acceptable. Here's a tweet from Alexander McCoy. If anything, Platner's flaws as an individual make his status as an avatar of the movement more reliable and credible. He is well aware he's not going to win because of his virtues as a dude or because of his fancy resume, like so many other politicians allow their own egos to convince them. He is being supported for one reason only, to deliver results on the issues people desperately need to change on. And that prompted a reply from Chris Freeman. He quoted the Platner as being supported for one reason only, to deliver results. And so Freeman said, one problem with this is that there's no evidence that Platner can deliver results effectively. So far, he's simply whined about oligarchs. Scary lawyer guy wrote, if Platner loses, put me down as a when he loses. His supporters will not blame him for his history of bad decision-making, tone-deaf answers, and general shadiness. No, it will be the establishment's fault for not properly supporting him. He cannot fail. He can only be failed. And then we got Mindy, who writes, read the Graham Platner stuff. I personally don't really care what anyone does in their private life, but he is obviously an imperfect candidate. But we're going to see a lot more of this as young people who have partied, said stupid shit online, etc., continue to run for office. A reply to that is from this Thomas J. Carcetti replying to that, because she's saying anybody in their private life, young people have partied, right? This is what this person's replying to. It says, Graham Platner is 41 years old, meaning it's like not young people stuff. A lot of this stuff happened in his 30s and maybe even in his 40s. Shannon Watts tweeted, I'm so tired of pundits saying we have to accept candidates who have said or done and posted incredibly weird shit. There are 300 million people in America. There are 535 members of Congress. I'm confident we can find that many normal people among us. Joe Szymanski tweeted, Graham Platner is Democrats' response to Blake Masters, a candidate who astroturfed by consultants from the extreme side of the party, where the consultants convinced themselves enough important people that the candidate connect to the normal man via populism, only for said candidate to either do or believe a bunch of weird shit that inevitably makes them unpopular to the common voter. It really is lovely to see the left finally making this mistake for once. Then there's this debate between this woman, Sarah Ironside, and this person, Austerity is Theft. This is what Austerity tweeted. He's a lifelong Democrat. He was literally in a Democrats club in high school. He donated to Kamala Harris in 2004. He voted for Sarah Gideon in 2020. He walked in the Women's March in 2017. He donated to Bernie Sanders in both cycles, the Maine Democratic Party, the DSCC. Sarah Ironside then replied, he voted for Collins 3 times. I didn't even realize that. He had a Nazi tattoo for 20 years, blamed women for being raped, cheats on his wife while she's undergoing fertility treatment, mocks dead soldiers. I didn't mention those Reddit posts, but those were pretty bad. Was a Blackwater merc. Yeah, he went back to Iraq to work for Blackwater. Still has a shirtless kick profile and continues to lie. I don't give a fuck about a donation. Lakshaya Jain, who's like a data analyst, said our modeling has Platner at a D+4 result based on the data we had pre-sexting scandal. I strongly take the under on that, and I'm not even sure he's a favorite to win the seat. The other thing with these types of candidates is there's always more that gets dredged up. Matthew Iglesias wrote a long-form piece titled "Issues Still Matter, but Can He Make the Case for Himself?" And do issues matter, right? I had Platner on and I asked him about AI. I asked him about education. And I have to be honest, his answers were super underwhelming. Let me just show you one example here where I asked him about education and Maine's pretty dramatic underperformance on education, even as the state has increased spending pretty high. These questions, I'm going to go in order of I have 2 Mainer questions. So I'm going to ask those first, given that you are trying to win the votes of the people in that state. So here's the first one from Carl from Portland, Maine. So he wrote, Maine is in the top third for all states in per pupil spending. He says like 14th or 15th. Yet when it comes to student achievement, they're near the bottom. 41st according to Kids Count, 43rd according to U.S. News and World Reports, 43rd in both NAEP, fourth grade math and reading. He says, when I hear Democrats talk about education, I hear very little other than to increase spending. But over the last decade, the state increased spending by over 70% and still dropped 15 points on NAEP. What would you do in DC to actually improve results for kids?
I mean, and increased spending from the federal level is very important, but I also think we need to rethink how we engage with the conversation around education. So my wife was an elementary school teacher for 15 years, and I watched firsthand her interact with a, frankly, failing education system. So much of it did come down to the fact that they did not have enough resources. She was very much one of those teachers who at the beginning of the year, she used our household money to buy school supplies for kids, which is insane. But there was no option. She cared about the students. So funding is important. But the other thing is that for a long time, the conversation and honestly the policy around education has primarily been driven by these like think tanks and educational consulting firms, not by listening to teachers, not by teachers' unions. And I just come from almost an ideological position that the people you should always listen to when it comes to any kind of job are the people that do the work, the people who day in, day out are engaging with the reality of their situation, and especially with teachers. You know, it's a very funny story, and I'm not going to get all the details correct, but there was a time back, I think in the 90s, where Bill Gates decided he was very interested in education. And they spent all this money, built all these think tanks, hired all these firms, these consultants to come up with all these ideas, spend almost a decade on these projects. At the end of it, it was the Brookings Institution, goes and does a after action report on it all, and comes to the conclusion that had they simply listened to what the teachers were telling them at the beginning, then they would have had better results. And honestly, I don't think you can come up with a better example of where we've gone wrong around education. But a lot of it does still come from resourcing. But if we put resources into it, but those resources get diverted away from providing actual, frankly, like higher paychecks for teachers, more resources in schools, better schools, and it's diverted more into like the think tank world and the policy papers and the consultants, you can do all the spending you want, but you're still not going to get good outcomes.
So you could be the judgment, for yourself about what he said. I always love this, we're just going to trust the teachers thing. It's amazing to me. Nobody's ever like, hey, let's ask the students. But the bigger part here is, how is Bill Gates responsible for what happens in Maine? Like, does he even know how much Bill Gates has spent? All the money I asked him about is the state's spending on funding, right? So if the state is spending money and it's the state and the individual school systems that are actually spending it. If they're spending money on consultants, that's not Bill Gates' fault, right? Do something about it, right? Don't blame it on. I know that blaming everything on billionaires is in vogue, but I'm not sure that Bill Gates giving away tons of money for education reform has anything to do with Maine, right? I've not seen him connect the dots on any of that. The bigger thing here is that I think the very existence of Graham Platner owes to something that I recently wrote about, and I'll link to the Substack piece on this, which is like the emergence of this new Democratic establishment, right? This is Pod Save America, it's Crooked Media, it's the big prominent podcasters, YouTubers, streamers, social media personalities, it's Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren, it's MS Now. These folks, and I wrote about this in the context of Hassan Piker, it's the New York Times, who had Piker on. These folks pretend that there's this prominent Democratic establishment, right? That's like pulling the strings out there. But what's really going on is that, yes, there is a very diminished DNCC, there is a DSCC, and there are things like the third way, right? Those are very diminished, right? The big players are the people with huge audiences who can make or break a candidate, right? Whether you go on Pod Save America or not, or MS Now, or get interviewed by the New York Times and endorsed, those are things that can make or break somebody, right? But they play a trick, right? They'll rail against the quote unquote establishment, these folks, even as they are the establishment, the people with the power. And in this case, I think that a lot of Platner's momentum, not all of it, like I do think people in Maine have agency, but a lot of the external, if you're just focusing on external support for candidates in Maine, is like whatever Mills was going to be getting from Schumer, which I don't think she actually got anything in the end. I don't know if they had time to send her any resources, would be dwarfed by things like repeated, glossing from people like Pod Save America, right? So that new establishment has some real blind spots. One is they don't realize they're the establishment, and this is what I wrote in my piece. Second, they have kind of embraced an amorality in the Trump era. They have stopped defending any principles of personal conduct or anything like that. And look, again, you could say somebody can overcome mistakes, but there is no attempt whatsoever. And this was most notable in the Piker situation. You could read my piece on that if you want to learn more about that. But like, there is no line anymore. And all of the things that people have been calling out members of the right for, they are now excusing on our side. And I personally don't see a line between what conduct we criticize on the right and what we are welcoming on the left. But more important than any of that, this new establishment, and I wrote about this, does not have a firm grasp on what they believe about the material world. Like, just listen to that answer on education. You can go back and listen to the one on AI. These people, especially within the media, right, have not spent enough time in the real world. Now, Graham Platner has spent time in the real world. Like, he's been in the military, right? And so he has. But the members of the new establishment are just like, oh, you're an oyster farmer, former military guy, let me support you, right? Versus, like, instead of thinking, hey, actually, there are people who've served in the military, or oyster farmers who are good people, and then there are people who served in the military and are oyster farmers who are bad people, and they don't know how to take the measure of a person. They couldn't take the measure of Hassan Piker and realize that this is a whiny millionaire who dunks on anybody who disagrees with him and excuses Russia, glosses China, and has refused to even engage with the party up until recently, right? But they don't know how to take the measure of people. And as I said, they can't tell the difference between Brian Stevenson and Ibram Kendi back in 2020. They couldn't tell the difference between Rashid Khalidi and Hassan Piker now. And they can't tell the difference between Graham Platner and Mike Rowe, pick whatever blue-collar person, I don't know. And I think this is a problem because I think a lot of these people, I grew up in Staten Island where I grew up, just because somebody's working class, there were sociopaths who were working class and there were really good people who were working class. And by the way, as we learned, we're not even sure Graham Platner's working class, right? Like, if you're listening to this, most of you probably did not have the privileges he had. I certainly didn't. So and I would never call myself working class, right? If I were to describe it, I would be like, there was this period of time when I was a kid where my mom worked 2 jobs as a nurse. Maybe that was working class, but the guy I am today, certainly not. So this is where we are. I think that this is an incredible risk. I would not be shocked if even by the time this video hits, we get more discouraging news in this race. I don't think it's impossible in 2026 for Platner to overcome all this kind of stuff, but he's got to be better. And I think one of the other dynamics here, after I interviewed him, I said to a friend, I was like, I think this guy doesn't take any advice from the people around him. There's like a certain amount of arrogance that kind of comes across. He's like, I know everything, And I think that's the kiss of death, because if you're going to go through a long campaign, you need people to give you feedback. You need to be reflective. You need to get better with time. Is this guy going to get better with time? If he does, he might be able to pull an upset. If he doesn't, this is all about guaranteed to be a throwaway and a huge missed opportunity for Democrats. So that's all I got for today. If you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button here. And you could also subscribe to our podcast, which is called the Lost Debate Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.